Oceans cover 70% of our planet's surface. With all that open water, you might assume cargo ships have endless routes to choose from. But in reality, 80% of all global trade is forced to navigate through a handful of incredibly narrow, natural bottlenecks. When those bottlenecks get clogged, the entire global economy feels the shockwave. We saw this in 2021, when a single ship wedged sideways in the Suez Canal blocked nearly $10 billion worth of trade every single day. But there is a maritime passage even tighter and far more volatile than the Suez. Right where the Persian Gulf meets the Gulf of Oman lies the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, the physical distance between the shores of Oman and Iran is only 21 miles wide. That tiny geographic gap is the single most critical vulnerability in the modern global supply chain. If it closes, the lights in some of the world's biggest cities go out. This data visualization tracks the sheer volume of global energy dependent on this specific route. Every single day, roughly 20 million barrels of oil and 1/5 of the world's liquefied natural gas funnel down from the Persian Gulf and squeeze through this tiny corridor. Moving that much fuel requires some of the largest machines ever built by humans. These are VLCCs, or Very Large Crude Carriers. They are massive, slow-moving vessels that sit deep in the water, built specifically to haul millions of barrels of crude oil at a time. Alongside them are LNG carriers. These ships use highly specialized insulated tanks to transport natural gas by chilling it into a liquid and compressing it down to a fraction of its normal volume, mostly destined for energy-hungry markets in Asia. Once these heavy ships exit the strait, they face a continuous, slow-motion journey. It takes them a day and a half to 2 full days of non-stop travel just to reach key western Indian ports like Kandla and Mumbai, before the remaining fleet continues onward toward East Asia. The industrial engines of China, Japan, and South Korea rely entirely on these slow-moving giants, successfully navigating this heavily monitored corridor day after day without interruption. Because of the immense wealth flowing through this water, it is heavily guarded. The United States maintains its 5th fleet in the region, deploying massive destroyers and heavily armed patrols to protect that trillion-dollar oil flow from regional threats. But traditional naval dominance struggles in tight quarters. Iran, which controls the northern coast of the strait, employs a strategy of asymmetric warfare, using speed, terrain, and unconventional tactics to neutralize the advantage of larger, heavier opponents. Instead of massive destroyers, Iran relies on fleets of fast attack boats. These small, highly maneuverable vessels are built to execute swarming tactics, darting in and out of the blind spots of massive cargo ships and sluggish warships. Beneath the surface lies a quieter threat. The shallow waters of the strait are highly susceptible to naval mines. Dropping these spiked explosives into the water doesn't require an advanced navy, but it is enough to physically paralyze shipping lanes for weeks. This schematic lays out the incredibly strict traffic rules vessels must follow. To avoid collisions and shallows, international authorities have designated safe shipping lanes, but these lanes are only 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a tiny buffer zone. Massive tankers have virtually zero room to maneuver. And as we zoom in closer, you can see how those tight lanes fall directly under the overlapping radar of coastal missile batteries. In a space this compressed, a single misidentified radar blip or a navigational error can trigger an immediate military escalation. In this hyper-compressed environment, global superpowers, massive oil tankers, and coastal guerrilla forces operate only feet apart. Yet directly beneath this hyper-militarized traffic jam, an entirely different world exists, an ancient, surreal ecosystem that most of the world never sees. Take Hormuz Island itself. It is a geological masterpiece born from compressed salt and minerals. The soil here, locally known as gelak, is so rich in iron oxide that it stains the landscape crimson. Local residents actually harvest this deep red earth to use as a spice in their cooking. Just across the water on Qeshm Island, an indigenous boat-building culture thrives. Craftsmen here construct massive wooden cargo boats called lenge, entirely by hand and from memory, relying on knowledge passed down through generations without ever looking at a blueprint. And to survive the brutal 110-degree summer heat, Coastal villages rely on badge gears or wind catchers. These towering, ancient architectural structures capture and funnel the ocean breeze down into homes, naturally cooling the air without a single watt of modern electricity. Communities at the epicenter of the world's most lucrative energy choke point continue to live by ancient, sustainable rhythms, almost entirely detached from the global oil trade roaring past their shores. But what happens if the tension in those waters finally snaps and the Strait of Hormuz is completely closed to traffic? The resulting logistical failure would be instantaneous. Coastal oil terminals and massive offshore loading docks across the Persian Gulf would become immediately paralyzed. Storage tanks would fill to capacity in days, with nowhere to send their crude. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates do have overland pipelines designed to bypass the strait and deliver oil directly to the Red Sea or the Gulf of Oman. But as this chart shows, those alternative pipelines can only absorb about 20% of the strait's daily volume. That leaves an immediate, massive 80% shortfall in the global market. There is no viable backup plan for a disruption of this scale. Closing the strait means an immediate, hard stop to a fifth of the world's energy output. The economic shockwave would hit East Asia first. Within days of the delayed shipments, major manufacturing economies would lack the power generation to keep factories running. Production lines would grind to a halt. But the true devastation hits at the micro level, especially for everyday citizens in developing nations like India. The macro geopolitical failure instantly translates to a catastrophic scarcity of basic cooking fuels and transport gas. Without the steady arrival of those massive LNG carriers, supplies of LPG, the liquefied petroleum gas used in home cooking cylinders, dry up. Citizens are forced into the streets, standing in winding lines for hours just for a single tank of rationed gas to cook their family's food. Prices for CNG, daily commodities, and cooked food skyrocket overnight. A maritime standoff thousands of miles away triggers intense, localized economic crises in the heart of distant neighborhoods. The modern, hyper-connected world rests on an incredibly complex supply chain, but that chain doesn't sit on an indestructible foundation. It hangs suspended, precariously, by a fragile 21-mile thread of water.
Mind blown? Subscribe to Discover Earth 360 for more insane world facts. Turn on notifications and comment what shocked you most about Hormuz.